The teacher's voice carried across the crowded parent-teacher conference as she slid the letter back across the table. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, but we simply cannot accommodate your son's behavior any longer." 52-year-old David Thompson sat rigidly in the small plastic chair, his prosthetic leg hidden beneath worn jeans as other parents whispered behind him. None of them knew that the quiet man being dismissed had written a letter so powerful it would soon reach millions, or that the slight tremor in his hands came from an IED blast that took his leg, but never broke his spirit. What's in this father's letter will move you to tears. If stories of courage touch your heart, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments, what would you do to protect your child? Your support helps us share these incredible stories that deserve to be heard. What's in this father's letter will move you to tears. If stories of courage touch your heart, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments, what would you do to protect your child? Your support helps us share these incredible stories that deserve to be heard. David Thompson had been dreading this meeting for weeks. His 8-year-old son Marcus had been having problems at Riverside Elementary, and tonight was supposed to be about finding solutions. David arrived early, parking his old Honda in the back of the lot where fewer people would see him struggle. Getting out with his prosthetic leg, the conference room smelled like coffee and stress. Parents sat around small tables with teachers, discussing grades and behavior reports. David found Mrs. Patterson, Marcus's third-grade teacher, at table 7. She was a thin woman with sharp eyes who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Mrs. Patterson didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Thompson, Marcus has been having significant behavioral issues. He's disruptive, unfocused, and frankly, his emotional outbursts are affecting other children's learning." David shifted uncomfortably in the tiny chair. "What kind of outbursts?" The teacher pulled out a thick folder. "Last Monday, he started crying during math class when Sarah Johnson mentioned that her father was taking her camping this weekend. Tuesday, he got angry during our community helpers presentation when Officer Martinez talked about police and firefighters keeping us safe." David's jaw tightened. He knew exactly why those situations upset Marcus, but he wasn't sure this woman would understand. Mrs. Patterson continued without looking up from her notes. "Wednesday was the worst incident. During our Veterans Day preparation, Marcus became completely hysterical when I asked students to draw pictures of American heroes. He threw his crayons and ran out of the classroom. Other parents at nearby tables were starting to listen. David could feel their eyes on him, judging the single father who couldn't control his kid. The teacher's voice got louder, like she wanted an audience. "Mr. Thompson, I've been teaching for 15 years, and I've never seen a child with such severe behavioral problems. Marcus seems to have an unhealthy obsession with military themes and an inappropriate fear of everyday situations." David felt his face getting hot. "What do you mean, inappropriate fear?" Mrs. Patterson leaned forward with the confidence of someone who thought she had all the answers. "He refuses to participate in fire drills because the alarm scares him. He won't eat in the cafeteria because he says it's too loud. During our safety presentation last month, he had a complete meltdown when the firefighter demonstrated the smoke alarm. A woman at the next table turned around completely, not even trying to hide her eavesdropping. Her husband joined her, both of them watching David like he was some kind of entertainment. The teacher wasn't finished. "Furthermore, Marcus has been telling other children disturbing stories about war and violence. Last week, he explained to his classmates in graphic detail how bombs work and what they do to people." David's hands started shaking. He pressed them against his thighs to make them stop. Mrs. Patterson pulled out another paper from her folder. "I've documented 17 separate incidents of inappropriate behavior since school started. Fighting during quiet time, crying when other children talk about their fathers, and making up elaborate stories about military operations." The couple at the next table was openly staring now. The woman whispered something to her husband, and He shook his head with disgust. Mrs. Patterson's voice carried clearly across the room. Honestly, Mr. Thompson, I think Marcus needs professional help. This obsession with military themes and violence isn't normal for a child his age. Have you considered that your own interests might be negatively influencing him? David looked around the room. More parents had stopped their own conversations to listen. He saw judgment in their faces, the kind of look people give when they think they're better than you. The teacher continued her performance. I've spoken with Principal Davis, and we both agree that Marcus might be better suited for a different learning environment. Perhaps a school that specializes in children with behavioral disorders. David thought about Marcus at home that morning, carefully packing his backpack and asking if Daddy would pick him up after school. His son always asked that question, even though David picked him up every single day. Marcus needed that reassurance because his world had been turned upside down 2 years ago when David came home from his 4th deployment, missing his left leg and struggling with nightmares. Mrs. Patterson was still talking. We need parents to take responsibility for their children's problems instead of making excuses. Whatever is happening in your home environment is clearly traumatic for this child. The room had gone quiet except for her voice. Everyone was listening now, waiting to see how the broken veteran would respond to being told he was damaging his own son. David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He'd written it the night before after Marcus crawled into his bed, following another nightmare about the loud noises at school. Mrs. Patterson looked annoyed. Mr. Thompson, if you have some kind of excuse letter from a doctor. David unfolded the paper carefully. It's not from a doctor. I wrote it myself. He cleared his throat and began to read in a voice that carried across the silent room. Dear Mrs. Patterson and Riverside Elementary staff, my name is Staff Sergeant David Thompson, and I am writing about my son Marcus Thompson, who is in Mrs. Patterson's 3rd grade class. The teacher tried to interrupt, but David kept reading. You say my son has behavioral problems, but I want you to understand why he acts the way he does. Marcus was 4 years old when I deployed to Afghanistan for the 4th time. He used to video chat with me every day, asking when Daddy was coming home. David's voice stayed steady, but his hands were shaking harder now. On March 15, 2022, my convoy hit an improvised explosive device outside Kandahar. The blast took my left leg below the knee and left me with traumatic brain injury symptoms that include severe anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Several parents exchanged glances, but the room remained completely quiet. Marcus was 6 years old when I came home from Walter Reed Medical Center. Instead of the father who left for deployment, he got back a man who screams in his sleep, jumps at sudden noises, and sometimes can't get out of bed for days at a time. David looked up from the letter and made eye contact with Mrs. Patterson. You say Marcus is afraid of fire alarms and loud noises. That's because he's watched his father have panic attacks triggered by those same sounds. You say he won't eat in the cafeteria because it's too loud. That's because he's learned that loud, crowded places make his daddy shake and sweat. Mrs. Patterson's confident expression was starting to crack. David continued reading. You say Marcus tells inappropriate stories about war and violence. That's because he's heard me crying out in my sleep, reliving combat experiences that an 8-year-old shouldn't have to know about. When he asks me why I'm upset, I try to explain in terms he can understand. The woman at the next table had stopped whispering. She was staring at David with a completely different expression now. You say Marcus has an unhealthy obsession with military themes. What you call an obsession, I call pride. My son is proud of his father's service, even though that service came with a price that affects our family every single. David's voice got stronger as he continued. When Marcus ran out of the classroom during your Veterans Day preparation, it wasn't because he was being disruptive. It was because drawing American heroes reminded him of the hero he used to have before the war changed everything. Several parents were looking down at their hands now, uncomfortable with the truth they were hearing. You say Marcus fights during quiet time and cries when other children talk about their fathers. That's because quiet time gives him space to worry about whether his dad will be okay when he gets home from school. He cries when other kids talk about fathers who take them camping and play catch in the yard, because his father can barely walk to the mailbox. Some days. Mrs. Patterson was staring at the letter in David's hands like it might bite her. David read the final paragraph with his voice barely above a whisper. My son doesn't need a different school or professional help for behavioral disorders. He needs teachers who understand that some children carry burdens that 8-year-olds shouldn't have to carry. He needs adults who see his compassion, intelligence, and resilience instead of labeling him as a problem to be solved. He folded the letter carefully and put it back in his pocket. I'm not asking for special treatment or excuses for my son's behavior. I'm asking for understanding. Marcus is not broken, and neither am I. We're just a family learning to live with the invisible wounds of war. The room was completely silent. Mrs. Patterson was staring at David like she was seeing him for the first time. David stood up slowly, his prosthetic leg making a soft clicking sound. Marcus will be back in school tomorrow, and he'll continue to be proud of his father's service. If you have a problem with that, you can call me directly. He walked toward the exit, his uneven gait echoing in the quiet room. As he reached the door, he heard Mrs. Patterson's voice behind him. Mr. Thompson, wait. David turned around. The teacher was standing now, her face pale and her hands shaking. I had no idea. I'm sorry. David looked at her for a long moment. Tomorrow, Marcus will be just as smart, brave, and caring as he was today. The only difference is whether you choose to see those qualities instead of focusing on his struggles. 3 days later, someone had taken a photo of David's letter and posted it online. Within a week, it had been shared over 2 million times. Parents from around the world commented about their own military families and the challenges their children faced. Mrs. Patterson requested a transfer to a different grade level, saying she needed time to learn how to better support military families. Marcus finished 3rd grade with perfect attendance and made the honor roll. The letter still hangs in Principal Davis's office, a reminder that every child has a story worth understanding.